So, I grew up in a farmhouse, built in the late 1800s. It was an L-shaped house, 2 stories with porches on 3 sides. I used to actually love that house, and the farm it was built on, but I was always scared of the upstairs floor. There were 3 rooms up there, a large central one, and then 2 bedrooms that formed the L shape. If I had to go upstairs for any reason, I would always run up, grab whatever item I needed, and then race back downstairs. And if I was home alone in the house, well, forget it. I would avoid the stairs altogether. Anyways, at night, I would sometimes hear someone walking up the stairs. My parents always told me it was just the house settling, as old houses do, or that it was just a rat or something. Anytime I was in the upper rooms, I always felt like someone was watching me. My brother always made fun of me because of it. He never had any issues up there. Because of that, he eventually moved his bedroom up there to the forward room when he was a teenager. He took the larger of the 2 rooms, the one with a closet and a hook-eye closure on the inside, something that could keep pesky little sisters out, as he put it, as if that was really necessary up there. A few days after moving up there, he wakes up one night to find me at the foot of his bed. He asked me what was wrong, and said that I turned and motioned for him to follow me. So he got up, turned on the bedroom light, and discovered that his bedroom door was still latched from the inside. He was the only one in there. My brother reported several incidents where he would find things moved around and would blame me. I insisted. I did not want to go in his room. On 2 other separate occasions in that house, I felt the quilts being pulled off me. I would turn over and see a skeletal hand and arm that ended at the elbow, grasping at the covers and dragging them from the bed. Each time this happened, the apparition was coming from the same location, as if reaching through the door beside my bed. I would hear footsteps walking in my bedroom and feel someone watching me as I hid under the covers. My mom later told me that she would sometimes hear someone talking in the house when she was the only one there. The entire time I was there was from age 7 to 14. I experienced many odd incidents that my family would brush off as just a child's overactive imagination. It was only after we moved from that house and I was an adult that my family finally admitted that what I experienced was real. They thought by telling me it was just my imagination that I wouldn't be afraid. So, after years of thinking I was crazy, I was kind of relieved to find out that no, I wasn't.
It was 1973, and my parents were living in Picton, in a small house my dad had built. While living at this house, my parents experienced several paranormal encounters, but this one was their most terrifying. My dad told me that even though he'd built the house, it just felt strange and creepy at times. My parents were night owls, and as it was almost 3 a.m, they decided to go to bed. They'd turned off the lights, and the room was quiet, when their Great Dane came running into their room, visibly afraid. The dog ran straight to the bedroom window, peeking out through the curtain to see what was outside. Dad and Mum both told me that he was acting very strange and seemed really afraid. And then they heard it. Someone was knocking on their window, followed by the voice of a small child. This only went on for a few minutes, but my dad said it felt like it lasted hours. They were too scared to even move and go and check who was there, so they just laid still in bed until morning, all while the creepy young child's voice kept calling. The next morning, my dad was up early and went over to talk to the neighbour, thinking, or maybe more hoping, that it was one of her kids. When Dad told her what had happened, the neighbour looked shocked. She looked at my dad and shook her head, said, "No, my kids were tucked up in bed. It definitely wasn't them." Now, me being me, over the years, occasionally I'd see my dad and I'd call out and go, "Let me in, I'm cold." Basically just to mess with him. But every time I do, Dad shivers, looks at me and says, "Don't, that's horrible." Which, I'm not going to lie, it makes me laugh. Over the few years my parents lived in this house, they did experience other things, such as waking up to finding a severed pig's head on their front lawn. But these are all stories for another time. As for the child who was knocking on the door that night, they never found out who it was. Maybe it wasn't even human. I'm not sure if this would be considered paranormal or not. It just seemed very weird to me. I'm an older woman, I'm married and have one daughter who is 11. This happened to both of us at separate times within a 2-week span. First, my story. My husband and I don't share a room because he snores like a chainsaw, and I apparently move way too much in my sleep. My daughter is autistic and suffers from serious anxiety, and more often than not ends up crawling in bed with me. Yes, this is significant to the story. One night, she wasn't able to even make it to her own room and crashed with me. I woke up after midnight to a knocking on my window. My room is at the back of the house, and my backyard is fenced, and the gate is blocked because of my 2 dogs. I thought at the time I was dreaming, but then there was another knock on the window, and I heard outside my window, "Can you please open the door? I'm locked out." My sliding door doesn't lock. We block it using a metal safety rod. My daughter was sound asleep, right beside me. So whoever was outside was not my daughter. I chalked it up to a lucid dream and went back to sleep. A week later, I came home from my late shift. My daughter was sleeping in her own bed, thankfully. I settle in and fall asleep. A few hours later, my daughter comes into my room and crawls in bed with me. I wake up and she says, "Why were you knocking on my window and wanting me to come outside?" I was wide awake immediately and sat up. "What do you mean, hun? I've been sleeping for a while. I heard you say when you knocked on my window, 'Hey, Rabbit.' Now this is shortened from Bunny Rabbit, the nickname she's had since birth. Want to come out and play? So I came here to see if you were outside." I didn't tell her that I heard a similar thing a week prior. I'm the only one that calls her Rabbit. This happened to my sister and I when we were pretty young. I was between 6 and 8, and my sister, she's 2 years younger than me. We lived in a haunted house for about 2 years. It was only very recently that my dad finally told me the reason we moved was actually because of all the activity that was happening in the house. Now, this house we moved into was old. It was built in the 1920s at least and needed work. My dad's a carpenter and had built so many houses over the years. Renovations were nothing new to Mum and Dad. What is it that they say about renos? That it can awaken the ghosts or entities that once were in the house. Now, I don't know the history of the house, and trust me, I have looked it up so many times, and there's not really a lot I can actually find. One thing I have found is that no one lives there for very long, and that quite often the house sells for a very low amount of money. I don't know about you, but that just screams haunted. Now, this house felt off to me, especially the rooms further towards the back of the house. 3 rooms in particular were horrible, and I felt afraid to go into them, even in the daytime. It was so much worse at night. I remember feeling dread every single night the sun went down. My sister and I experienced several things in this house with the paranormal, which I have shared on the channel before, but this one has stayed with us. It is by far the worst thing that ever happened. So this old house had a wine cellar, which was accessed from the backyard. This wine cellar also happened to be directly underneath these rooms that made me feel uncomfortable. The overall layout of the house was off and just felt wrong, like things were in the wrong spot. I was a kid, so I figured it was normal. So we were down there in the cellar playing with our dog Pebbles. Now, for the layout of this cellar, it was fairly big. My dad had knocked out a wall down there too, making it more open. There was an opening on the south side, which was the entrance, and on the west side was a wall of bricks with the decorative holes in them so light would filter in. The cellar itself was divided into 2 rooms. The first section was where we were playing with our dog, and the second, which had a wall with a crawl space or hole in the wall that led into underneath of the house and each room. This was to gain access to the wiring to the heated flooring. So, as I said, we were playing with our dog when all of a sudden I remember feeling quite uneasy and the need to just look up. And there in the dark area of the cellar stood a large figure. This figure was almost like the outline of a really big man, but I couldn't properly make out any features. Our dog was barking and my sister and I just stared at it. We were terrified. We somehow knew it wasn't a person, and the fear that I felt was like nothing I had ever felt. Even thinking about it now sometimes scares me. I froze and I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I couldn't say anything. I just stood there with my sister. Now, I have spoken to her recently too, and she said she remembers it having yellow eyes. I remember the height and the outline of its shoulders. The most terrifying part was the way it looked at us. It gave us the most terrifying grin. It was like it wanted to hurt us. We stood there staring at its grin, and to this day, neither of us can get it out of our head. It tilted its head back as if it gestured with its head and then moved its hand like it was trying to beckon for us to follow him further into the darkness of the cellar. My little sister grabbed me and we ran out of there. I don't think I would have been able to move if it wasn't for her. It was the scariest thing that happened to us while we were in that house. What we saw and felt that day scared the living shit out of us. Since then, we've always referred to it as the demon in the cellar. This story takes place in Norway, at a folk high school where I met my girl. The school was built in 1915, and I didn't research the school before going, but if you look on the internet, you'll find it has a rather dark and unexplainable history, from deaths in the school to spirits being heard and seen in the sub-basement. The place had never given me the creeps before, and I'd never been a believer of the paranormal before either. When I first started talking to my girl, she told me that she had a lot of contact with the spirits at the school. She'd been talking to spirits all her life and accidentally summoned demons from her bathroom mirror when she was 8 years old. Anyway, we started living together at the school in January this year, and for the first few months, there was nothing out of the ordinary. It all started one night in early March when we went out at about 9 p.m. for a smoke. She told me before how she'd spoken to spirits at the smoking hut, and the grounds outside, it is very active. While we had the smoke, nothing happened, but on the walk back to the school, maybe 100 metres away, we both felt very uneasy. Just as we got into the light of the front door, she stopped and looked behind us into the dark. She told me something was watching us, and we both looked into the darkness, hoping to see a badger or a fox. After maybe 30 seconds, she pushed me into the school and followed quickly behind me as we heard footsteps on the gravel that quickly turned into a run. Then, for a few more weeks, we had nothing. Towards late March, we unpacked my old PS4 and took it to an empty room on the 3rd floor of the school with a projector to play games undisturbed. The entire 3rd floor has always had a real heavy atmosphere, and I always thought it was because there's a lot of windows, so the sun all day makes it stuffy. Anyway, we played for about 2 hours, and it got to maybe 1900 hours, and I needed to piss. So I went to the tiny toilet at the top of the stairs on the 3rd floor, at the end of a long corridor. As soon as I went into the bathroom, I felt an atmosphere like I'd never felt before. Heavy, sad. The air was bitter and smelt like sulphur. I thought it was the drains, and I was burning a fever almost. I was very uneasy and pissed quickly. Then, when I was washing my hands, I looked at my reflection in the mirror above the sink, and even though I was looking at myself, I also wasn't. There was something different that I couldn't put my finger on. I ignored it and quickly left for the safety of the projector room and my girl. A while later, she went to the same bathroom, but came back seconds later, saying she'd rather hold it in. I asked her what was up. I hadn't told her about my experience yet, and she said all the same stuff as me, with the addition that she got tunnel vision as soon as she opened the bathroom door. We turned on the lights in the room we were in and tried to keep playing, but then things got weirder. There was a room next door to that room that was used by the drama students. All the walls were mirrors, and the floor was the original floor from 1915. From the door leading into that room, we started hearing tapping on glass, footsteps walking around in a loop, and the breaking point for us was a bang on the door into our room. We packed our shit and left. The whole walk back to the bedroom, which was directly under the projector room, felt unnerving. Hairs on the back of our necks standing up, shortness of breath, you know. We got to the room and tried to have a good rest of our evening, laughing, talking, listening to music. But both of us still felt anxious, as if we were being watched. We went to bed, and the next morning woke up both having similar nightmares. My girl dreamt that she was a student at the school when it first opened, but then all her classmates got hollow eyes, and her face started melting as they attacked her. My dream was darkness, with nothing but a disembodied deep voice spelling both of our names over and over again until I woke up. The next night, we went back to the projector room, and similar things happened, only we heard grunting and more bangs on the door. After we walked back to our dorm, we sat in the common room, and I noticed my girl had a bright red mark on her neck, as if something sharp had been dragged across it. At this point, we couldn't be alone, so we had to go to the bathroom together and shower together. The heavy, sad presence and the smell seemed to follow us everywhere. I was never marked, but she was a lot. She came out of the shower one time with what looked like 3 claw marks, bright red, stretching right across her chest and stomach. We decided to cleanse our room, as she is a practicing witch and we're both pagan. We wanted at least one safe spot. We laid a salt line across our doorway and covered the mirror in our room over with a blanket. She did the ritual, but halfway through, even though all doors and windows were closed, the candlelight was blown out quickly. I couldn't bear to look in any reflective surface, and I hadn't slept in a few days at this point. We began walking around the school with protective runes carved into stone. Things calmed down for a while, and one night she decided to go to the bathroom alone, only to run back to me moments later as something started banging hard on the bathroom door as soon as she sat on the toilet. We decided to do another ritual, not for cleansing, but for protection, using our blood and some soil from the grounds. While we were out, at maybe 2300 hours, digging up soil from the ground below a large tree, we both heard heavy and quick footsteps rushing towards us that faded into nothing. We quickly made our way to our room and made our offerings and then went to sleep, hoping for the best. Woke up the next morning to see the salt line had been disturbed but not fully broken. A good sign that what we were doing is working. Then we didn't experience anything for a while, until the weekend. There was a party at the school, and as me and my girl were walking back to our dorm, we saw several damp footprints starting from nowhere and leading into the old assembly hall where they hung pictures of all the past students. We didn't dare to follow them. We were going to New York a week later, so started wondering if we should contact the spirits, see if they were trying to warn us about something. We went up to the 3rd floor with our Ouija board and some candles, and as we opened the door leading onto the corridor, we were both hit by a blast of boiling hot wind and the smell of sulfur again. We were scared, but contacted them anyway, and ended up speaking to the girl who died in her bed not far from the room we were in. She was a friendly spirit and told us a little about her past. We learned she liked Elvis, so we played Elvis whenever we were near the area she died in. But after about an hour of talking to her, the sulfur smell started again, faintly, and the board started getting quiet. Everything we asked, she responded only with no and can't. Then our candles went out, and we thought, fuck this, and left. After a few nights undisturbed, we uncovered the bedroom mirror and started feeling more comfortable in our room again. Then we went to New York. We came back after nearly 3 weeks away from the place and still felt the presence of whatever was there, but less intensely. The haunting lasted around 24 days. Pretty creepy. Any ideas why we got targeted? Why whatever was with us was trying to harm my girl? My theory is because it was a Christian school and our beliefs might have seemed offensive.
I was born and grew up in a town called Shrewsbury in Shropshire, England. The town has a reputation of being one of the most haunted places in the world. The town is well over 1,000 years old. A lot of the ruins of old buildings remain, even in the town centre. Everyone I know growing up had some sort of experience, haunted or otherwise, at some point in their lives. So, getting to my most haunted experience, that spans a number of years. These aren't my only experiences, but this is the one that has affected me the most. My grandparents have a house that all of the family grew up in, so my mother and her siblings. This house has a back bedroom that gives off a vibe that you just don't want to mess with. It's the only room in the house that has the door always closed, and is now used as a storeroom that my nan refuses to enter alone. It was used when I was a kid as a spare bedroom for when me and my brother would stay over, but we hated being in that room. One night, my brother and I were asleep in there, and I woke up just in time to look over and see the lighting fixture on the ceiling next to my head. I can even remember the feeling of the cold plaster touching my cheek right before whatever the hell was lifting me let go. I hit the mattress and immediately started screaming. My dad burst into the room to find out what happened. I told him everything, but he was obviously skeptical. But I even remember him saying that the room was very cold, even though the heating was on, and there was an odd feeling he just couldn't explain. My brother, who was asleep during my incident, said he had a dream that night that an old man standing over him and shouting for him to get out! And to this day, he is reluctant to talk about it because of how it made him feel. Now, this is where it starts to get worse. I was told this was over a month after the first incident, but I was at home in my house, the other side of the town, and it happened again. Me and my brother at this time used bunk beds, and I slept on the top bunk. My dad was downstairs watching TV, and all of a sudden he said he got a feeling something was wrong, then realised the feeling he felt was the same as it was when I had the incident at my nan's. He ran upstairs, burst into the bedroom just in time to catch me falling from the ceiling. I'd been picked up, lifted over the bed's safety rail, and was hanging with my head tilted towards the ground. My dad burst in to see me hanging there in midair for a split second before dropping, and he caught me. He was terrified and could never explain what had happened. Nothing ever happened again until I was in my mid-20s. My nan was heading out somewhere for an overnight stay, so I would stay the night, feed the dogs, and sleep on the sofa. I did everything stated, went to sleep on the sofa, but woke up in the morning in the spare room at the back of the room behind a load of storage boxes. It took me 5 minutes of moving the boxes out of my way to reach the door to get out. And to this day, now 14 years later, I've no idea how the hell I got into that room over those boxes and to the back section of the room without damaging anything. I've never been more frightened after waking up in all my life, and I've never stayed another night in that house since. My nan refuses to talk about that room. My granddad was the same prior to his death. I've no idea what happened in that house, what spirit, or even worse, is living in that back room. But I'll never go back in that room for as long as I live. The following story is a personal thing that I experienced with my sister. This was back in the 80s. We were living in a double brick house with our parents. The house was really old and built in the 1920s. One night, for no reason, I woke up and I stared out through the open bedroom doorway, and there in the darkness I could make out the shape of a person. I thought it was Mum, as this figure stood the same way my mum would do, with her hand on the door jamb, just looking in at us. Thinking it's Mum, I've called out and said, "Mum." But nothing. It didn't say anything. And then I started to feel scared, so I remember hiding under the covers for a few seconds and maybe counting to 10, hoping that by the time I'd pulled the covers off my head and looked again, it would be gone. But it wasn't. And then I whispered to my sister, hoping she'd be awake, "Erin, are you awake?" And then I hear her whisper back, "Yes." And then I said to my sister, "Is that Mum?" And she says, "I don't know." By this point, we were both really scared. I was too scared to say too much, in fear that the thing, whatever was at the door, was going to hear me and come in. I was hoping it couldn't see me either, as I was trying to hide as best as I could behind my toys and my blankets. I really wanted to call out for my parents, but I was so afraid that it was going to come in and get us. Every time I tried to call out or yell, I couldn't even make a sound. Eventually, I took a deep breath and screamed out for Mum as loud as I could. Mum opened her door and came running in the dark, running straight through the figure, which disappeared. My sister and I were terrified. Thankfully, we never saw her again. But we did see other things, which unfortunately were much more terrifying. There is 100% a paranormal presence in my house. Myself and partner have sensed it ever since we moved in 5 years ago, but it's never been any real trouble. We call it the Joker, as it likes to wind us up sometimes by letting us know that it's there. It seems to like being acknowledged, and it seems to make it stronger, but it's never really felt too scary, and we've just gotten used to it until now, that is. Or it could possibly be a new or different presence. I'm not really sure. We have an attic bedroom that is a spare room, so we've turned it into a games room. Myself and partner and our 4-year-old son were up there last night chilling out. I was on the phone to a friend, and my partner was laid down on his front on a blow-up airbed playing with our 4-year-old son. All of a sudden, I hear this huge bang. I turn to look, and my partner is on the floor approximately 2 meters from where he was. Thinking he'd just fallen over and hit the wall, I asked him if he was okay, and he starts shouting that he had literally been picked up. He said like someone had dug a shovel underneath his middle and thrown him hard into the wall. Fast forward to this evening. Partner goes out with a friend. I'm home alone with our 4-year-old son, and he wants his ice cream cart toy that is up in the attic room. I didn't feel comfortable going up there, but I did. I grabbed the toy cart and ran back down the stairs. My son, however, wanted to stay up there and started crying and wouldn't come down. So I'm stood at the bottom of the stairs shouting for my son to come down. When I look up the stairs, on the wall I see the clear shadow outline of a head and shoulders, as if someone is stood looking down the stairs, and the rest of them is cut off from where the side stairs wall is. I stared at it for like 3 seconds and then watched it move off to the left. It wasn't my son, as he had just reached the bottom of the stairs where I was. This shadow outline also had what I can only describe as layers of wispy, wavy-like smoke next to it as it moved. The very same thing I saw hours earlier float right past me whilst I was on the toilet. I just brushed it off as something I thought I saw, but actually hadn't, as at the time I didn't feel scared. Now it's 3:30 a.m. I'm fast asleep, son next to me as partner is still out. I'm immediately woken by a loud voice shouting, "Ah!" I shout, "What?" And then I have an overwhelming urge to look at my phone. because I just seem to know it's going to be 3:30 a.m. And when I look, it's bang on 3:30 a.m. I felt totally freaked out, got straight on the phone to my partner, still wide awake at 5 a.m. and feeling uncomfortable. If anyone out there has any advice or could help me, I'd greatly appreciate it, as I have no idea what else to do.